WWE has just given us a very interesting clue about Roman Reigns, WarGames, and possibly even Seth Rollins. The official Survivor Series 2026 promotional poster is now out, and once again, Roman Reigns is right there as one of the faces of the event. The Tribal Chief is back on the Survivor Series poster, and that alone is enough to get people talking, because this is not just a regular Survivor Series event. Survivor Series 2026 is being promoted around WarGames, with the event scheduled for November 28th in Houston, Texas. Now, obviously, WWE putting Roman Reigns on a poster does not technically mean that his WarGames match has been officially announced. WWE can change plans, additional matches can be added, and promotional material can sometimes be released before the final story is completely locked in. But when you combine Roman being prominently featured with the WarGames presentation, the timing becomes very interesting. And there's an even bigger reason why this could matter. Seth Rollins. Because after what happened at SummerSlam, the possibility of Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins being on the same side at WarGames suddenly feels much more realistic than it did before. Think about where these two men were just a short time ago. Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins were not friends. They were not teammates. They were two of the biggest rivals in WWE, and their history goes all the way back to the Shield. The Shield was one of the most influential groups of the modern WWE era. Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, and Dean Ambrose entered WWE together and quickly became one of the most dominant trios in the company. They were dangerous because each member brought something completely different to the group. Roman had the power. Seth had the athleticism and unpredictability, and Dean brought his own chaotic intensity. But that alliance eventually collapsed when Seth Rollins turned on Roman Reigns and Dean Ambrose in 2014. That moment became one of the defining betrayals in WWE history. From that point forward, Roman and Seth spent years building their own individual legacies. They became world champions, WrestleMania main eventers, and two of the most important stars of their generation. And while they occasionally found themselves on the same side, the original Shield relationship was never truly restored. That is what made SummerSlam so important. Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins finally had another major singles confrontation, with Roman defending the World Heavyweight Championship against Seth. WWE itself described their relationship as one built on years of rivalry, while also acknowledging that there had been brief post-Shield reunions in the past. But the most interesting part was not simply who won the match. Roman won. The interesting part was what happened around the conclusion of their story. Instead of ending with another betrayal or another attack, the two men acknowledged their shared history. The match included several references to their Shield past, and after the match, Roman and Seth shared a moment that clearly felt like a tribute to what they once were. That is the kind of moment WWE can use as a foundation for a much bigger storyline. And now we have Survivor Series. That is where things get really interesting. Imagine Roman Reigns entering WarGames with Seth Rollins standing beside him. Just think about the visual. Roman Reigns on one side of the WarGames cage. Seth Rollins standing next to him. Two former Shield members who spent years trying to destroy each other suddenly fighting together again. That is not just another tag team. That is history. And WarGames is probably one of the few WWE matches where a reunion like this makes perfect sense. Because WarGames is not about one superstar simply proving that he is better than another superstar. It is about teams, alliances, betrayals, strategy, and surviving an environment where the people standing beside you can be just as important as the opponent standing across from you. And that makes Roman and Seth a fascinating combination. Roman Reigns is one of the most powerful performers in WWE. Seth Rollins brings a completely different style. Seth is unpredictable, extremely athletic, and capable of attacking an opponent from almost any angle. If you put those two together, you have an incredibly dangerous combination. But the biggest question is not whether they could work together. The biggest question is whether they can actually trust each other. Because this is Seth Rollins we're talking about. Seth was the man who destroyed the Shield. He was the man who turned his back on Roman and Dean when the group was at its peak. And Roman never simply forgot that. Even years later, the history between them continued to influence their matches and storylines. So if WWE wants to put Roman and Seth on the same WarGames team, there's a lot of material they can work with. You could have Roman initially refusing to trust Seth. You could have Seth explain that he is not trying to recreate the Shield. He is simply trying to win the match. You could have Roman say that he doesn't need Seth. And then, as the story progresses, circumstances force them to work together. That is where the magic could happen. Imagine WarGames beginning with Roman and Seth on the same team, but neither man fully trusting the other. Then the opposing team begins to overwhelm them. Roman gets isolated. Seth enters the cage. Roman and Seth start fighting side by side. For a moment, the old chemistry comes back. And then you get that iconic Shield-style moment. Not necessarily a full Shield reunion with Dean Ambrose, because Dean is obviously no longer part of WWE, but a callback to the relationship that made Roman and Seth such an iconic combination in the first place. That would be a huge moment for the audience. And the timing could not be better. Because SummerSlam gave WWE an opportunity to close the chapter on Roman versus Seth as a pure rivalry. Roman defeated Seth, and instead of leaving the audience with another bitter ending, WWE gave them a moment of mutual recognition and respect. That does not automatically mean they are now best friends. And honestly, WWE shouldn't make them best friends overnight. That would actually weaken the story. The better approach would be to keep some tension between them. Roman can respect Seth without trusting him completely. Seth can respect Roman without suddenly forgetting everything that happened between them. That makes the potential WarGames partnership much more interesting. Because the audience would constantly be asking one question. Can Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins actually coexist? And that question alone could carry an entire Survivor Series storyline. Now, let's talk about the Survivor Series poster again. Roman being featured as one of the major faces of the event is significant because WWE knows exactly what Roman represents. He is not just another name on the roster. When WWE puts Roman Reigns on the promotional material for an event built around WarGames, fans are naturally going to assume that he is going to have an important role. And if Roman is involved in WarGames, the next question becomes obvious. Who is going to be on his team? That is where Seth Rollins becomes one of the most fascinating possibilities. There are plenty of other combinations WWE could create. Roman could lead a team made up of members of the Bloodline. He could team with other major babyfaces. WWE could create an entirely new rivalry and build a completely different WarGames story. But Roman and Seth together would have something those other combinations simply cannot recreate. History. These two men have already shared the biggest stages in WWE. They have already betrayed each other. They have already competed against each other for championships. They have already been members of one of WWE's most iconic factions. And now, after SummerSlam, they have finally reached a point where respect between them is possible again. That gives WWE an opening. The question is whether WWE will actually take it. Because if Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins are placed on the same WarGames team, this is not something that should be treated like a random tag team pairing. WWE has the opportunity to make this feel like a major chapter in their careers. You could even have commentary constantly remind fans that these two once stood together as the Shield, then spent more than a decade becoming enemies, and now find themselves standing together again inside the WarGames cage. That is the story. You don't need to overcomplicate it. You don't need Roman and Seth to suddenly become permanent best friends. You simply need two former brothers-in-arms to realize that, for one night, they may have a common enemy. And that is exactly why I think this idea works. The Shield reunion has always been one of those stories WWE can return to because fans immediately understand the emotional weight behind it. We have already seen Roman, Seth, and Dean reunite in the past. We have also seen Roman and Seth briefly find themselves on the same side at different points. But a Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins WarGames team in 2026 would feel different because both men have now built completely different legacies from the people they were in the Shield. Roman became the tribal chief. Seth became the visionary. They became rivals, champions, and WrestleMania-level stars. And now, after everything that happened between them, they could potentially walk into WarGames together. That is a story worth telling. But there's one thing we have to be clear about. As of right now, Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins being officially announced as a WarGames team is not confirmed. The poster strongly puts Roman in the Survivor Series conversation, and the WarGames branding makes his involvement look increasingly likely. But WWE has not officially announced the complete WarGames teams yet. So calling Roman's WarGames participation confirmed is better understood as a direction WWE appears to be signaling rather than a formally announced match. And honestly, that makes the speculation even more fun. Because now we get to watch how WWE builds toward November 28th. Will Roman choose his team? Will Seth be involved? Will WWE put them on opposite sides again? Or are we actually heading toward one of the most unexpected partnerships WWE could create? Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins standing together inside the WarGames cage would be an incredible image. Two men who once stood together as brothers. Two men who eventually became bitter enemies. Two men who spent years trying to prove they were better than the other. And now, after SummerSlam, potentially standing shoulder to shoulder once again. Imagine the crowd reaction when Roman gets into the cage. Then Seth's music hits. Seth walks down to the ring. He enters the cage. Roman looks at him. Seth looks back. And instead of attacking each other, they turn toward their opponents. That moment alone could become one of the defining images of Survivor Series 2026. And if WWE is really planning Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins as teammates, then Survivor Series could give us something much bigger than another WarGames match. It could give us the next chapter of the Shield story. Not a complete reunion, not a reset, but something much more interesting. Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins choosing to fight together again after everything they have been through. So now I want to know what you think. Would you actually want to see Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins on the same WarGames team? Do you think WWE should fully reunite them for Survivor Series, or should Roman and Seth remain rivals even after the SummerSlam ending? Because personally, I think WWE has a very interesting opportunity here. The SummerSlam story gave them the emotional closure they needed as rivals. Survivor Series could be the place where they discover what happens when they stand on the same side again. And if that happens inside WarGames, with Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins fighting together once more, WWE could have one of the biggest nostalgia-driven moments of the entire year. The Tribal Chief and the Visionary, former brothers, former enemies, and potentially, once again, teammates. Survivor Series 2026 is still months away, but this is already looking like a story worth watching very closely.